Hello and welcome to Troy University's roundtable discussion of its 2014-15 Common Reading Initiative, which focuses on the classic work by Ray Bradbury, Farenheit 451. I'm joined today by a number of colleagues, and I'll do a brief introductions around the table, and then we'll get on to discussing what is truly going to be a great book for us this fall. We'll start with Professor Jim Davis in the Department of English, and a person that I know teaches a lot of science fiction, and will have some, I'm sure, some good insights for us today. Mrs. Pam Allen, who's in our Art and Design Department as chair. And certainly the issues of art and the freedom of expression are important. Mrs. Theresa Johnson, who leads our all of our students, particularly our younger students, in the pursuit of writing excellence. And so we're glad to have you with us. Dr. Jeff Spurlock, who's director of the Hall School of Journalism and Communication. And certainly there are issues related to what constitutes the freedom of expression there. Absolutely. And Dr. Michael Slobodchikoff, who comes to us from the Political Science Department. And I think we'll probably have some issues that we'll unpack there as well. I want to start with the group, and maybe we'll start with Jim on this, just as a question to kind of throw on the table. Bradbury writes this book. It was published a little over 60 years ago. He had some short stories that sort of led up to that. So, you know, if you look at sort of his development as a writer, but the book is published in the early 50s. And the question is it still relevant today? We're certainly going to talk about it, so it must be, but you tell us, is it relevant?
Of course it is. I mean, Mrs. Johnson and I have been having this discussion for a couple of weeks now. It's even more relevant right now with students walking around with their faces in their iPhones all day long. Just like that couple that Bradbury talks about in his one of his introductions, where he saw a couple and the woman was walking with a radio earbud in her ear, and he realized he wasn't writing about the future. Boy, he didn't imagine anything like what today. I mean, you don't have to go home to be immersed in the big wall anymore. So yes, it's much more relevant. That's just technologically, and then also politically. I mean, I'm very discouraged about politics in our country because everybody just finds somebody to listen to that tells them what the world is all about, and they don't bother to think about it for themselves. So I think in that way, it's also very relevant.
Yeah, Theresa, you're teaching the book, right? You're using it in your class.
And I totally agree. And to illustrate this, I said to my students one of the first days, what would Ray Bradbury write if he were to sit in the quad at Troy University and watch the students as they go by? Now, we don't have a texting and walking lane, as I understand it. One university is doing some research on that because it does affect our gait when we text and walk. But I said, what will you think? So I asked my students, I said, when you come in my classroom, put the phone away. I want you to have human interaction. Don't text the same 3 friends that you've been texting from high school. Our chancellor's brought the world here. Get to know people in your class. A couple of days later, as I was going down the hall, I walked by classroom after classroom. Each person was involved with his phone in some way, whether researching, texting, Facebooking, whatever. I could hear my students all the way down the hall. I walked in and I said, my goodness, you guys are so loud. Why? Everybody else is quiet. One young man said, you told us to put up our cell phones.
Yeah.
And I said, talk.
That's
talk.
It. Good.
Exactly.
Good.
Interact.
Well, I think there are people who probably may not be as familiar with the book. We would certainly want people to read it. It's not only our common reader, which means all of our entering students are reading it at Troy University, not just Troy campus, but Troy University, wherever. It's also the book that we've chosen for our National Endowment for the Humanities, for the Arts, National Endowment for the Arts Big Read, which is a Troy campus, Troy community book. So we're getting a lot of this kind of discussion. But I have to turn to people like Michael and Jeff and ask the question. The thesis of the book is that in the future, in this dystopian society, firemen won't put out fires, firemen will burn books. Let's talk a little bit about what that means. We have contemporary examples of burning of books, maybe that don't involve fire, right? So what are some examples of what's going on that make it relevant today?
Well, Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I was just going to say that I was really struck by the fact that Bradbury was telling the future of today in this book, very much politically, as we were mentioning earlier about how politically we have become isolated. We watch things that we agree with. And I was reminded of a certain section when the Hound is chasing the main character, and how the people are glued to their television sets, watching and waiting for this gratification at the end. And when they don't have him, they just get somebody. They just get somebody, and the people are appeased. And I think we see that a lot today. I remember during the Persian Gulf War, we watched footage from bombs attacking bridges and things like that, and we were glued to our television sets watching this. And we didn't know where this was occurring, what was happening, but we were really seeking that gratification of seeing what was going on. And I think we're seeing a lot of that today. And we're not opening our minds to what is really occurring and not asking the important questions that need to be asked.
Yeah, Jeff?
You know, you were talking earlier how about burning books. And we all remember the book bans. To Kill a Mockingbird, Lord of the Flies.
And Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit,
Fahrenheit's been on the
absolutely.
banned book list.
You bet. Huckleberry Finn. All of these books were burned technically, or burned theoretically. They were banned. And why were they banned? They were saying that profanity was used, or you know, some other things that are done on a daily basis here in America. These books are classics. These were same thing with Fahrenheit 451. These were burning of books, not the actual lighting the fire.
Sure.
But they were actual banning of books. And so we even Harry Potter.
Yes.
You know, we can go to the Harry Potter series. People were banning those books because of whatever they were reading in those books. But a lot of the people who were banning these books, what did they do? They didn't read the books.
Right.
They didn't read them.
Right. Yeah,
And they were just,
if you look at that list, I mean, you can get a list of what are called
Right.
banned and challenged books, and it's a fairly sizable list of what really is the American canon. I mean, the classic American works. I don't think anybody would argue that there are certain books that are more appropriate in terms of age specific.
Sure.
And quite frankly, given the plethora of publishing, there's some books that probably we just shouldn't read because they're just not very well written.
Right, right.
But the idea of control, I want to come back to Pam for a minute, because when we start talking about freedom of expression, we so very quickly get the arts out front because they become a lightning rod for what constitutes a freedom of expression of the artist and what his or her work will be. You're a part of this overall discussion that we're having with the big read and with the common reader on this. What's your take on Fahrenheit?
Well, I used Fahrenheit this summer with a class that was kind of an open class, and the students could do whatever they wanted to. The only thing is they had to read the book. So they produced a body of work that really brought into a lot of discussion about symbolisms and how relevant it is today with what we do and what they do. And they had to kind of pick symbols, things that they got from the book. And I had an older gentleman, and his issue was with technology and the love of books. But we also, you know, and all his imagery was about, you know, how he couldn't deal with today's technology. And then we started talking about things like my grandson learning to read on playing games on my iPhone. And we started talking about how many students read because they have instant accessibility. And so we started thinking, well, maybe technology today is not a bad thing, that maybe it's a good thing because they can go in and write a book if they want to. They can publish a book if they want to, and it's instantly reaction through Facebook or social media of any kind. So we got to thinking about all of those kind of things and realized that what we love, we continue to do no matter what. And I love books, by the way. I think they're beautiful. Visually, books are beautiful. In fact, I talked about a student this morning that's writing a book for his thesis, and he was interested in the words. And so our discussion today was in the way the book looked. And his eyes just sparkled when he realized that he had control on what it was to look like and how you turn the pages and how the creases are. And those are the things that I love about a book and what my students love about a book. And so we talk about those kind of discussions when we were talking about Fahrenheit and the symbols of water and fire. And as y'all can tell, I could go on and on.
Sure,
and on.
well,
So-
here's the question I would ask the group. This is a book that at one level is a narrative. It's a dystopian society. A fireman who has a job of burning books, largely because the fascist government is afraid of the freedom of ideas,
Exactly.
and ultimately has an epiphany, and the story turns. That's the narrative level. That's what my English colleagues would tell me is sort of the story there. But the real textual message or subtextual message has a lot to do with the value of books and ideas. The value of books and ideas. And that's the piece I want to pick up on. It's not so much that we read in a different technological way. The question is, are we engaging in the kind of reading that leads to the kind of discussion? Michael, you made the statement that we tend now to attend to information that reinforces how we believe. I read an article recently that said that in a very social media driven world, we're only attending to the things that we already believe in. So this notion of dialogue, which implies that there could be differences, isn't happening very much. So our students, and I say this all the time, they're reading because they're reading text, they're reading websites, they're reading at that level, but they're not reading in an engaged fashion, which is very much a part of what we're trying to create at Troy. And they're not having a dialogue, which is very much a part of what the Big Read grant is all about. So what about this notion of books and ideas? What's your sense about where we are with that? Because we come from the professorate, so we all have books in our houses, and we all read, and we all talk about them. But what about our students,
Well,
Michael?
I think the irony of technology is that we now have access to things instantly that we would not have access to before. I've spoken with my students about card catalogs, and they look at me very blankly because it's at their fingertips. They can get anything they want. The problem is that the technology has become very isolating. It's become self-reinforcing, and we don't challenge our ideas. We don't have the dialogue that we do. And I know in my classes, I try and engage students in the dialogue. And I know I offend a lot of my students when I say that studies have shown that people who watch Fox News or MSNBC are actually less educated on what's actually going on than people who watch Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart. And so they're very offended by that thought. But it goes back to that reinforcing of the ideas that we already have and not challenging them. And I think a good book really can challenge our ideas in a non-confrontational environment that allows us to consider the validity of our ideas. And then we can hold a dialogue about that and further evolve in our understanding.
Is there a line, is there a passage in a book that comes to mind that you had that experience with that personally challenged you in a way that led to that kind of deeper discussion or deeper understanding? Is there anything that
Yeah,
comes to
of
mind?
course, but now let's go to Ray Bradbury. On page 81, he talks about the lack of the quality of information.
Right.
This is exactly the problem. The second was having the leisure time to think about it. In our society today, just like you said, Mike, we are bombarded, and somebody is telling us what to think. And we tune in to the channels that tell us or reaffirm our thoughts. We don't want them challenged. And then the third thing that he says, and this is what my students are writing about right now, what's wrong in the world? Illustrate it. And so Ray Bradbury points out the third thing is having that wisdom when we've looked at both sides, the quality and then having the leisure time to think through and then do something about
Yeah.
it.
And go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to echo something that Theresa said, and how you're very familiar with this theory. There's a communication theory called agenda setting.
Yeah.
And agenda setting says that the media do not tell people what to think, but instead what to think about.
Right.
And in this particular case, like you were just saying, Theresa, what are our students reading? Yes, they have all this technology in front of them. They have their iPhones and they have their Kindles, or not necessarily their Kindles, but their iPhones and their phones and all of these devices. But what are they actually reading? Every once in a while, at the beginning of a semester, I'll ask my students to identify themselves, tell us where you're from, what you want to do after you graduate from Troy, and I'll either ask what's your favorite movie of all time, or what was the last book you read? And I say, don't tell me a textbook.
Right.
What was the last book you read? And there are a number of students who will say, boy, I haven't read a book in years.
Yeah.
In years.
Yeah.
What do you read? Well, I read Facebook.
Yeah.
No, that's not a book.
Right.
Facebook is not a book.
Most of them get their news from Facebook.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
But I think it's a valuable question because there's a discipline related to
Exactly.
being an engaged reader, right? I mean, if you're going to engage the text and you're going to get into it and struggle with it and be confronted by it and then want to talk about it. So I'm back to my question a minute ago. Where did it turn for you, Pam? What's an early recollection you have of you read something in a book and you went away going, I'm challenged by that, or I'm pushed by that? Do you have that kind of recollection?
I mean, as a young
Yeah, as a young
person?
reader.
Oh gosh, I remember being profoundly affected when I read A Scarlet Letter.
Yeah.
I mean, and To
that's
Kill a
not an easy-
Mockingbird.
that's not an easy
No,
read.
but
No,
I
not
do
at all.
remember that. And I used to belong to the Book of the Month Club, and I was pretty young. And I read the Gertrude Stein's novel, and I thought, probably that's what changed me going into art. Because, and I was very young, I was in high school when I read that.
I'm reminded, and I was fortunate. I came along in a generation like all of us did, where there was a real emphasis on reading. So there wasn't a question of are you going to read. The question was, here are the books you're going to read,
What are you
right?
reading?
And so I remember getting into those. I mean, they are the quintessential Western American canon books, right? Hemingway, Steinbeck. Well, a lot of those are sad. I mean, I can remember reading A Farewell to Arms, and I get to the end, and she dies, and the baby dies, and I'm going, man, there's no happy ending here, right? And then I get into Of Mice and Men, there's no happy. In fact, anything by Steinbeck, The Red Pony, The Pearl, Of Mice and Men,
Exactly.
Grapes of Wrath, they all die. And I remember thinking, this isn't like watching a Disney movie. And I had that really profound awareness that I was watching stuff that was much more kind of, whatever you want to call that, sort of fairy tale-ish. But these were not. See? So, Jim, did you have that experience along the way? I mean, you ended up as an English professor. I hope you had that.
A lot in high school. I'd save up 35 cents and send off for a paperback from Washington Square Press. 'Cause I didn't have a bookstore within 50 miles. But yeah, I think it was Crime and Punishment.
Yeah.
Was the big turning point for me. I mean,
Yeah, and you read it and you...
all the stuff. And I
That's
love
going on.
Dostoevsky. I was just talking to Theresa about Dostoevsky this morning.
Yeah, and I think what we've allowed to happen, and I've said this before, is that we're not encouraging people to be those kinds of readers. We've sort of slipped off the edge a little bit. I know one of the things that I still like to do, but I like to give books as gifts.
Yes.
And I find it increasingly difficult because so many people that I know that are younger are not real sure what to do when you give them a book, And for me, that was kind of a big deal. What about this notion of contemporarily with books and ideas? I'm thinking about the whole set of issues surrounding the NSA, tapping into what we're saying on our cell phones, wiki secrets, the suppression of the web in a variety of countries around the world. One of the things that really stood out for me is as we got into the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square in China, the government shut down access to the web because there were so many stories about what had happened and so many of their own people don't know.
Well, we're seeing 1984.
Well, yeah, we have different
George-
book, but
yeah,
same
exactly.
idea. Yeah, yeah.
George Orwell is here with us right now. We're seeing a lot of 1984. We have been seeing a lot of 1984 since Orwell, and now. I mean, all of the stuff that talk about security that you're talking about, Hal, that's what we've seen. When did Orwell write 84, 1984?
48.
48.
Yeah, 48,
He flipped the
absolutely.
numbers.
That's right,
Yeah,
he
he
flipped the
flipped the
numbers.
numbers, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So since 1948, we've been seeing all of this.
Sure. Well, and I would argue that that's part of what the book is really all about, is ideas, why ideas matter. Malala as a good
Right.
recent example, the young girl who's really blogging that women, young women especially, have the right to an education, and the Taliban attempts to kill her, and gets real close to doing that because the ideas are threatening.
Well, I think also what astounds me about these various books and this various dystopian society is the fact that the people bring it on themselves. It's not an outside plot.
Exactly.
And I remember watching I think it was the director of the CIA addressing a congressional hearing, and what wasn't off the record, he was asked, well, what about Facebook and all of that? And he said, you know, that's the biggest gift to the intelligence community. We used to not know what people were thinking or what people were saying.
Yeah.
We had to
know.
spend lots of man hours. Now they not only do we know, but they tell us themselves, and we don't have to expend the time and the energy to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Theresa.
Noteworthy was that Bradbury said this was not instituted by the government.
No,
It was by the
no,
people.
exactly. It's by the
Right.
people
Yeah.
themselves.
Apathetic.
Well, and think about what Jeff was saying too, I think, or Michael was, about reality TV. I mean, that works. That level of television works because people tune in and watch it. Otherwise,
right.
advertisers wouldn't support
That's
it,
right.
right?
And the irony of the thing is low cost.
Oh, it's
It
very
is
low
low
cost.
cost. That's right. That's
Set up
right.
a camera and just follow the lives
That's
of
right.
people. See,
That's right.
and there is that kind of sense that
It's sad.
we're so disengaged that we have to have a vicarious experience by watching somebody else have problems.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it's always someone that you can look down on.
Well, a
No,
little
you
bit,
don't
yeah,
watch
a
that.
little bit.
It doesn't happen to you.
No.
Right, right. And you're
Just like
removed from that.
Mildred.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't try to commit suicide,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Right.
it wouldn't happen to you. But, you know, Bradbury also pointed out that we put in our books, or our good content, ideas that we want to remember. And I've been doing this forever in moral literature. I start with, there's a tapestry on the wall, this thread
Sure.
from the Iliad, from the Odyssey, all the way through Shakespeare. And I want to touch on this one line because it's one of my all-time favorites from Bradbury, page 79. The magic in books. It's only in what books say and how they stitch the patches of the universe together into one garment for us.
Yeah, yeah. That really is. That.
And our students today have turned on to this book, and it's simply because we're all talking about it. We're discussing it, and we are all co-creating or co-constructing, if you will, some meaning and giving something that's worthwhile to them. And I feel that they're hungry for this. But we, as a part of the university, if we don't do this, then they could just as easily participate in this reality TV situation.
Well, I do think you have to cheat to read, right, Jim? I mean, there's never going to be enough time to read.
Well, I choose reading over sleep.
Well, most of us
where
do.
that comes
But I like this idea about the storytelling function. I mean, there is very much that one of the characteristics of people is that we are the storytellers, right?
Exactly. That's
And
what-
so this Bradbury linkage about the stitching of that, I think that's neat. Go
When
ahead.
I'm teaching, say, the Iliad or the Odyssey, it's all about storytelling. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how they preserved their stories. Even before they had books, they had to do the memorization. I think that's really relevant to the memorizing of the books.
That's right.
Yeah,
And it's all, we have to preserve our stories
Well,
for future, and
I-
get them thinking about it too.
I think part of engaging it is that we're reading it, but we're also recalling enough of it that you can then enter into a dialogue. And so often, we live in a world where there's so much information, it sort of hits you and glances off. And so this idea of sort of tucking away certain pieces, the opening line of the book, it was a pleasure to burn. What a profound opening line. And I love with my students occasionally to say, let's bring together, what are your favorite lines from books?
Yeah.
And let's just put those on the table and talk about why they matter and what do they tell us about you. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but I do want to ask this question. As we move out into the fall, and I know we're teaching it in our classes and we're talking about it, what are some ways we're really going to open it up and expand it? Pam, you're doing some art-related work on this story?
Right. Well, we're doing a collaboration with the Charles Henderson High School Art Department. They're creating illustrations of their favorite books. So, in fact, we get them this afternoon, and then our graphic designers are creating posters out of them, which
Great.
we'll have ready by the 15th.
Well, we're going to, in addition to what we do with our entering students and our selected classes, we're going to have our kickoff coming up for the Big Read, which is sort of the parallel track to the Common Reader this fall. We're really building on that synergy. Coming up on the 16th. And we've got a series of discussion groups. We've got a film series. We're going to be in a lot of locations locally talking about the book. We want to encourage people to ask people, what are you reading?
Right.
What are you reading? And if you run into a group of students know, they know I'm going to ask them that. I think what they really do is they just go to the library and pick a book title so that when I ask them, they'll have it. But what we're reading, and I want to encourage us to continue that dialogue in the classes. I know all of us are committed. I know Jim and Theresa especially. That's what you do every day. But the rest of us, it's easy sometimes not to do that. We get busy and we get a little task with it. I think Farenheit has amazing value for us, because I don't think that story grows old. And that is that when people get afraid, they start shutting down dialogue and discussion, and whether it's literally burning, and I think most of us are old enough to at least remember people who remember when they burned books. And often those were not the government either. Those were crowds who willingly brought the books to be burned. Or the Beatles
That's what I was
records.
gonna say.
That was the other group. So,
Or right now, we have issues here on campus of blocking sites and things like that.
Yeah.
That we're having issues in the visual world.
in the visual world. Yeah, our goal, one of the things we're going to do this fall is have an opportunity for people to really talk about what books they read that show up on those banned and challenged list, and why. And so we have a lot to look forward to in that. We think that it's a tremendous opportunity to discuss why ideas matter and why books are important. I think sitting with you all today, the beautiful thing is we're readers. We like to talk about it. We like to talk about it so much the students get tired of it. But we think this is an excellent book. We want to encourage the people who might be viewing this to be a part of the conversation. And certainly if you have an opportunity this fall, come down and be a part of that conversation about Farenheit locally with us. So we appreciate you joining us today. We've been talking about the Troy University Common Reader, which is what all of our entering students read and have had a different book now for a number of years as we create a culture of engaged reading, and our NEA Big Read. And we hope you'll join us next time on our next roundtable at Troy University.